Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today's video is going to be a continuation of the series I've been doing about disproving the virgin birth. And this time, I'm going to be doing a review of the Hebrew translation of Luke as a contradiction. So, in order to begin this particular part of the video, I want to show you something from something that a missionary posted earlier, and I'm going to switch screens real quick. Just to kind of, actually, I'm going to probably start sharing here. Um, just to give an idea of something that I found really interesting with something that was presented in a missionary video. Um, and the reason why it's important is because something is mentioned in it, and it goes to some of the things that I presented in the previous videos, as well as something I'm going to be talking about in this video itself. So I'm going to let the missionary, for example, talk about what he's going to say, and then I'm going to basically, you know, uh, review it and kind of like do some, talk about some things that kind of interconnection with it.
This actually supports the understanding that Alma can and does refer to a virgin here. So the claim that
Okay, so that's the part I wanted you to hear the person say on their own. This idea that they are trying to present that the word Alma, and he was talking about the part of Yeshayahu 7:14, or in English you say Isaiah 7:14, where he's claiming that in the circumstance of the text, that Alma is the correct translation there. Now, what I want to do is actually show you something. I put together a kind of a presentation about this, and I'm going to kind of like really basically go through and debunk, what he's talking about there. Um, excuse me. So, basically, this is what I wanted to get into. Okay. So if I go back to what I presented in the previous video concerning what does the word Alma mean, this here, as you can see in Hebrew, is the word Alma. Now, according to the definition in ancient Hebrew and modern Hebrew, the word Alma basically means a bukhora. Bukhara is a term used in Hebrew to mean like a young woman. Bukhara, for example, could be a teenage young woman. Up until about maybe in 20s, you can say bukhara. And essentially, what it denotes is a isha tzira, which means like a young woman. Okay, and I also talked about like just the issue of in modern Hebrew how the word is sometimes yuhalma used to mean like miss in English for someone who's not married, a woman who's not married. Now, the thing that's going to be important for this discussion is the word Bethula. Now, Bethula in ancient Hebrew, as well as modern Hebrew, always denotes a woman that's a virgin. Now, one of the things that's listed here, if you look in this first arrow, is that the word Alma is also used as part of the definition, as well as Isha Shelo Niv Alo. What this means is that the word Alma, Bethula, essentially means virgin. Under all circumstances, it means virgin. And, there are circumstances where you could have a woman who is, for example, a young woman and be a Bethula at the same time she's an Alma. But the word Alma itself does not mean what Bethula means. So, the word Alma basically just denotes a young woman, but it's not connected to like what her, state is in terms of her sexuality or things like that, or history of it, where the word Bethula and under all circumstances means virgin. Now, the thing that's I noticed in the previous video where I talked about this is that this statement here in this particular dictionary says Habathula HaKodusha, which means the Holy Virgin. And it states that this is a term that's used to describe the Christian belief concerning the mother of Yeshua, the mother of Jesus. So it denotes that this word Bethula, the Holy Virgin, when translated into Hebrew, would be translated as Habathula HaKadosha. Now, the thing that's interesting, if the word Alma at all was, noted as the word to mean virgin, then they would have made it instead of Habathula HaKadosha. They could have said Ha'alma HaKadosha. But even in modern Hebrew and even in ancient Hebrew, this was always the case that the word Bethula always means virgin. And there's no reason for someone who intends to say virgin to use the word Alma, because the word Alma does not mean virgin. So going back to what their claim is, and I point this out for some very specific reasons. Just to make sure that a person hears them saying it for themselves and sees them writing it for themselves, that they are specifically claiming that Yeshayahu 7:14 is strictly talking about a virgin, and they provide no evidence to that being the case in ancient Hebrew as well as modern Hebrew. It's just simply the theology that they've built up because of their belief in the New Testament. So what I want to do here is go back to the idea that I had about looking in the New Testament in Hebrew and looking for any kind of red flags when I investigate it. So here's something that I found interesting. Going back to what this particular missionary was claiming, about the word Alma meaning virgin. Um, in the Gospel of Luke, the Hebrew version of it, I read through it, and it says something very interesting in the following. It says, "Kasher ra'a lahasir et harpothim bekarev b'nei Adam." So this, kind of talks about the Luke version. This is from like Luke chapter 1. I wanted to start at verse 26. So Luke chapter 1, verse 26 says, "B'chodesh hashishi nishlach malach Javriel me'et ha'Elohim la'ir b'Galil asher shama Natzorat." So translated, this says that in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from, of Elohim, using the term, to the ear of in the Galil. And it says, the place was like, the Shir Shama Natzarat. And it says that, in verse 27, El Bathulah me'oreset li'ish me Beth David ushmo Yosef v'shem habathulah Miriam. Translated. This particular translation, whoever translated it, interestingly enough, instead of saying that, this angel was sent to the Alma, who, was me'oreset, to this it says me'oreset, and we'll get into this in just a second. In the previous video, I talked about what the term me'oreset means in Jewish culture and history, as well as halakhic or Talmudic history. Meaning that in English they usually translate it as betrothed to but betrothed doesn't mean the same thing as me'oreset. So she was basically me'oreset to the man from the house of David whose name was Joseph. And then it says Vashem haBethulah Miriam, and the name of this Bethulah was Miriam. So here's what's so strange. You heard the missionary specifically mention that the word Alma, when it comes to Yeshayahu 7:14, means virgin. But then you look here in the Gospel of Luke and you see that here it's using the word Bethulah. Now, this is another red flag. Excuse me. And this red flag is very important. It's concerning the use of the word Bethulah twice to describe Miriam, which we mentioned before that the word Bethulah always means virgin, but the word Alma does not. So this brings up the question, if the word Alma means virgin, why did the Christian translator of Luke from Greek to Hebrew use the word Bethulah? He should have used Alma if that's what the Christian understanding means, and if that's the connection here that's being used to connect it to Yeshayahu. Why in the book of Luke is he translating it as Bethulah if it's understood that Alma means virgin? Why not translate it as Alma under all circumstances? What in the thinking of this translator, what does he consider to be the difference between the use of Alma versus Bethulah? He should have used Alma under all circumstances. There'd be no reason to use Bethulah if Alma means virgin. Now this presents an interesting challenge to what, I mentioned in the previous videos concerning what shows up in the book of Matthew. So this is a big red flag to me, that the fact that they are not consistent with this idea. So the next thing, which is another red flag, and this is what I mentioned going back to this one, where I said that the word, if you can see my mouse, the word here where it says me'oreset, meaning that, Miriam had a certain relationship to Joseph during this time that's described, where, essentially this angel, comes to them, and basically that, there was this connection between them that basically meant, according to Jewish history, something, and we'll get into what this word me'oreset means because it's used again further in the particular text of Luke. So in this Hebrew translation. So if we go to, the 2nd chapter, specifically, there's another red flag that goes back here, and it's mentioned here. So this is 2nd Luke, the 2nd chapter of Luke. This is verse 5. And this is the part where it talks about the census that was mentioned. It says, "Bayamim hahem yatzat sab me'et hakesar Augustus le'orach rishon toshovim bechol haratzot." So essentially it says that, there were days where the Caesar, Augustus, basically wanted to take a census of all the inhabitants, all the lands. And it says, "Hamafkid hazem rishon na'aruch biyot kironios natziv Surya." Okay, and then it continues and says, "Hakol halachu lahitpaked ish le'iro." So the idea is that this, the census that's talked about, where every, man was considered to go back to where his ancestors came from. And it says, "V'gam Yosef shahaya me'beth David u'mishpachto ala min hagalil ela Yehuda me'ha'ir Natzorat, le'ir David hanikret Bethlehem. Now, this basically says that, Joseph, also, was going, and that he had to go to the, his ancestors' house of David, of David's family. And basically it says, Allah mina Galil. So he went from the Galil to the region of Yehuda, which, is from the north of the land to to the middle part of the land. And it says that he went from Nazareth, the city of Nazareth, to the place where, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. Now, I forgot to mark this as a red flag because this doesn't make any sense. Because if the basic census idea was that every person, every man was supposed to go back to where he came from. Because it only says man. It says ish lioro. It doesn't say like his family had to go. And it doesn't say his wife, his children. It basically says man. Here it says akol halachol hitpaked ish lioro. Now, it doesn't specify also how he knew to go exactly to Bethlehem, because as we know from Jewish history, David was born in Bethlehem, but he didn't live there his whole life. In fact, if you say the Ir David is close to Jerusalem. It's not in Bethlehem at all. So it doesn't make any sense when the text doesn't tell you how this particular census, and also if you look historically, this census never actually took place. And there was no way to even manage a census where you tell every man to go back to where his ancestors came from, because it's like, which ancestors? I mean, how did he know to go to the city where David was born, but why not go to the city where Solomon was born? Why not go to the city where Yehuda was born? Like his ancestors, from Yehuda, Judah, the son of Yaakov, why not go to where he was born? So it doesn't make any sense, when there's no specification. And to even tell someone that, you're basically telling people to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That's a huge distance. But here's what the thing that brought up the red flag that I mentioned. It says in verse 5, Lahith paked Miriam arusato v'hi hara. So it says that Yosef basically took Miriam with him to this, counting of the census that he's supposed to go do in Bethlehem when she was erusin to him, and erusoto, and she was pregnant. So there are two issues I noticed with this when I thought about it. I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And here's the first one. The term arusato means that Yosef was not allowed to take Mary on a trip with him to Bethlehem. And the question you could ask was, well, why? Why couldn't he have taken her? He was betrothed to her. Well, according to Erusin, this is what I mentioned in the first video where I talked about this. At this stage, the betrothed couple may not live together as man and wife. And in most couples, in most of the couples, mutual obligations do not yet apply. Now, it isn't just the fact that he can't live with her, he can't even be alone with her. And that's actually mentioned in Matthew that he had not yet been alone with her. So he can't go to his father-in-law and say, okay, I want to take, my, even though I'm only an Erusin, I want to take her with me to Bethlehem. He can't do that. During the Second Temple period, there was no such thing. You're not in a position, you're not fully married to her yet. You've only started the process. You haven't finished the process. When you finish the process and she's your wife, okay, sure, you can go wherever you want. But at the time, she would have been living with her father in her father's household. And there's no way Joseph can come back and say, okay, I want to take her with me. And the text never tells us that Mary's father had to go on this trip, and that's what's so weird about it. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. He couldn't have taken her during his time of Erusin. He would have had to go on his own. She would have stayed back in the Nazareth. So that part, is one major issue. So I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And again, this is the wording that was chosen by the translator, the one who translated this from Greek to Hebrew. So this isn't like me just making up stuff. They're the ones who chose this wording. And it's very strange that they chose a word like that means something different, which makes me think that they probably didn't know, or think that the person reading it would even know what the word erusoto would mean and the connection it would have to saying that they were erusim. Now, the next thing is, if you look on a map, a modern day map, and say, okay, well, what's the distance between Nazareth and Bethlehem, modernly? Well, you're looking at about 150.6 kilometers in terms of distance, which driving a car would take you in Israel today would take you about 2 hours and 8 minutes to drive from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Now, going back to the Second Temple period, so first of all, like I said before, Joseph couldn't have just picked up Mary and gone to Bethlehem with her. He wasn't fully married to her yet. He was only an Erusin. Erusin didn't allow him to do something like that. Even taking her with him would have been considered him trying to initiate something as if he's married to her, and that would have never flown. The other issue is Mary was pregnant. There's no way she could have traveled 150.6 kilometers, which would have been by then either walking or riding on a mule or something. She couldn't have like done all that. And how did they have the money to do all something like that for both of them and to get like the transportation, if you will? And I've actually traveled from Nazareth to around Bethlehem. It's if I did it by bus and like by what's called Sherut here, which is like a minibus. It's not an easy drive. So imagine trying to walk or ride a horse when you're pregnant, through that area that long. And if it takes 2 hours by driving, you could figure it took them several days to get there. That literally makes no sense. And the census didn't even call for him to do that. It just said ish, which means a man, just the men. It only says the men. It doesn't say any of the women were supposed to go with them, which, like I said, that doesn't make any sense. There's also another issue concerning this whole road trip of theirs. If such a trip was required by Roman law, why are there no records of any Jews from that time period making a similar trip? Meaning that the text seems to only say that Joseph was the only one making this trip. There's no mention anywhere in the New Testament of other Jews making this trip. Because, for example, if Joseph had to go, then his father had to go, and his brothers had to go, his uncles had to go, his cousins had to go. And, depending on Mary's father, all of them had to like disperse from wherever they went. So looking at this map, imagine if Mary's father his family was from here. Well, now he's got to go in this direction. Joseph's got to go in that direction. What if Joseph has a brother-in-law, from another, from, or something, or half brother? He has to go in this direction. Everybody's having to disperse. People from Bethlehem, if they're from Nazareth, they go back to up to Nazareth. That doesn't make any sense during the Second Temple period. It doesn't even make any sense today. If someone called the census and said everybody's got to go back to where they came from in order to be counted for a census, like, no, you count them where they are and where their property is. That's the way they did those kind of census. And there's even historians who say that this census didn't even happen, that there's no records of it, and it doesn't even make any logical sense. So going back, to this whole issue that was mentioned by this particular missionary, and I'm going to go backwards to this presentation I put together. Again, he's claiming that the word Alma essentially means virgin. And that is correct to translate Isaiah, and I'll show you where this is, from their site. So essentially you look at what they're presenting here and they're saying that the word Alma means virgin, but I showed earlier how that doesn't, hold any water. And even in the Greek, the Greek translations that do exist today, the word, used in Greek doesn't even mean like virgin, especially not in terms of sexuality, and that it doesn't match like, what's actually listed here. And then, if we go through and look at these red flags, we look and say, okay, well, if what you're saying is true, then a modern day Christian translator should have translated Luke, 1:26 and 27, with the word, Bethula, I'm sorry, with the word Alma rather than Bethula, because then it would have been consistent, but there's no consistency even in these translations into the modern language. And, again, if, Alma means virgin, why did the Christian translator of Luke, from Greek to Hebrew use Bethula? It doesn't make any sense. And this is one of the reasons I would say that if a person is going to even investigate this, investigate it critically. Look at every point and say, okay, well, wait a minute, where are you getting this from? I mean, the word Bethula has a certain meaning to it that isn't, the same as what Alma means, because there'd be no reason to have the word Bethula mean virgin and then Alma mean virgin. And then, most mission, in fact, one of the things I posted in the comment section of this particular video that they made, if you look in certain Christian translations, there's some Christian translations where they've actually corrected, how they, translate Isaiah 7:4, where instead of virgin, they've said young woman. There's some of them that have been honest about it that, okay, we know that the word Alma doesn't mean virgin. It means young woman. So again, this is a Havever from the Chronicles of a Havever, and I thank you for listening. Take care and bye.